We're not those things, right? God is those things. That's why God gives us the rules. Okay. So we can see why this ends up being potentially problematic for God. Why is it potentially problematic for God for goodness to depend upon them? That seems like the best case scenario, right? Don't we want goodness to depend upon God? What could potentially go wrong here? Absolutely, right? And so, theologians are going to have to do some explaining, right, with stories like Abraham to try to reconcile that with a God that's not supposed to change, right? Not supposed to just change their mind, because that would imply a lack of perfection, right? But then how do we account for elements like the story of, creation in the Garden of Eden, and God is looking for like they're really weird instances of God all of a sudden not having all the knowledge or something, right? So again, it depends on if we're taking a literal interpretation or a metaphorical one, right? And so some people might go more metaphorical here and say, well, God never really intended for Abraham to kill his son, right? It was just a test. That's the most common interpretation, right? Is that God never would really will for someone to kill their offspring, right? But it was simply a test of their faith and their willingness to follow God's command. Again, though, what else does that say about this kind of God, right? It's some interesting. There's some interesting explaining we have to do in that regard, and it doesn't make God look. God doesn't come out looking the best when we start engaging in these explanations, right? It becomes very like manipulative, very cruel, almost sadistic, maybe, depending on how far one is, looking at the various narratives. Right. And there are lots of rules in biblical scripture that we would now look at and say, that's terrible, right? Like, stoning a woman who leaves her house while she's menstruating. Hi, Cease. I know I don't like that one either. Right? We disagree. We disagree with it. Oh, I'm gonna say hi. I terrified you. Okay. This is Cece. Hello. Goodbye. Right? So again, which set of rules are we getting? Right? What do these rules say about the divine being?